Good evening and welcome to our webinar, Living and Working Abroad in the United States of America. My name is Karen McQuigge and I'm the Alumni Director at McMaster. This event is part of a 2-week series at McMaster, which is called McMaster Global. So during the first 2 weeks of November, McMaster showcases all the ways that we are making a commitment to learning and engagement on a global scale. And we thought in the alumni office, what a better event to do than to invite 3 outstanding graduates to come back and talk about how they made the choice to live and work in the US. So I'm so pleased to be joined by Maurice Leacock from the class of 1993. Maurice is in Boston. Ramneek Demon is the class of 2012, and she's living in Seattle. There she is. And then last but not least is someone who worked for me for a brief time period. He worked at McMaster, and so I have a soft spot for Natraj. Natraj Ramachandran is from the class of 2006, and he's in Atlanta tonight. So welcome to Maurice, Ramneek, and Natraj, and I look forward to our conversation. So I'm going to kick it off and sort of ask a general question to everyone. Each of you graduated from different programs. Natraj, you were in life sciences, Maurice, chemical engineering, and Ramneek, political science. So why did you actually choose McMaster for your educational experience, for your undergrad degree? So I'm going to start with Maurice. What made you decide that Mac was the right place for you?
Partially because there was a nuclear reactor on campus. One of the things that amazed me about it is that nuclear medicine was at the forefront of what McMaster researchers were working on. And I was intrigued by that. And when I came to take a tour of the university, I really got swayed by, going to the engineering building, seeing, the students there, talking to a few of them, and just the general atmosphere when I was there, how friendly people were for, a know-nothing high school student coming through, and really taking the time to walk me around, show me outside of the tour. So of all the places I had been, it was by far the place that felt most like somewhere I could really be myself and kind of set up to get successful, to become more successful over the 4 years. So.
And Ramneek, you came to McMaster, and I guess if you were a 2012 grad, you arrived on campus in 08, around then. Yeah. So why did you choose McMaster?
Well, for me, it wasn't as intentional as it was circumstantial. I visited my sister. Well, I was dropping her off during Welcome Week because she too went to McMaster. And upon dropping her off, I was just kind of really captivated by, number one, the beauty of the campus, but just the Welcome Week events themselves, the excitement, the energy. And then from there, I did some research independently, and visiting my sister for the few years that she was there. Every single time I would just be again, captivated by the culture. And that was kind of what initially drew me in. And then doing some of my research, I learned more about the school, the reputation. And eventually, once I did decide to go to McMaster, it definitely lived up to the hype. And I too ended up going and being very involved in residence life. So that has definitely added to my experience.
And Natraj, how did you get to Mac?
Yeah, I got to Mac, actually it wasn't intentional as well. So I was actually living in the United States in Boston, and I was a Canadian citizen at the time. And so it was pretty much a no-brainer for me to go to Canada to school because it was half the price. And decided on Mac mainly because I think I originally thought of McMaster or University of Toronto because those are the schools that you really know when you're in high school in the United States. And I really wanted a campus feel as opposed to being right in the city. And that's mainly kind of why I chose McMaster.
So Natraj, I'll stick with you for just 1 second. What's the best lesson you learned from your time at Mac? And was it inside or outside of the classroom?
That's a good question. I think it would actually be both. And the reason why I say both is inside the classroom, one of the things I learned is just having the ability to critically think. I did a very general degree. It wasn't something that was super specific in, something really specific. It was very general. It was a life sciences degree. But one of the things I really appreciated about the program was having the ability to choose the classes I wanted to, and having the ability to critically think and adjust to different situations. Outside of the classroom, I would say what helped was I was fortunate enough to work for McMaster right after that. And so what really helped me after that was just talking to alumni, because that was part of my job, and understanding the different experiences people had. And also, again, the word adjust always came up a lot of times, right? People being adjusted to different environments and things like that. So that's kind of how, those are the two big influential things for me.
Maurice, what do you think your best lessons you got from Mac? Was it inside or outside of the classroom? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm going to go with inside. As much as I really enjoyed the extracurricular parts of Mac, and I was in residence life as well, so much so that I came back from off campus to join residence life when Head and Hall opened up way back then. But I remember one influential professor, Dr. Woods, Donald Woods. He had a course for his chemical engineers that taught problem solving. And I always thought it was kind of goofy because the first thing you say is, I want to when I can, which we all got a chuckle out of. But to this day, I mean, 20 odd years in my career, I still use that technique, right? Just unconsciously at this point. And I pass it on to other folks. And I don't believe I would have gotten that level of instruction around problem solving anywhere else, really. It was one of those marquee programs that at the time really stood out as McMaster.
And Ramneek, what about you?
I'm going to pick the mysterious option C, which is a little bit of both. For me, I think that there's comfort in what's familiar, and then in the unfamiliar, you can find growth. And that was definitely something that resonated with me because I moved away to McMaster. It was my first time living away from home. So it taught me that I was able to kind of land on my feet when I ventured outside of my comfort zone. And it also taught me how to be adaptable to my circumstances, which I think is a lesson that I've carried throughout my career and my life up until this point. So I think, being able to be adaptable to my circumstances, being able to kind of stand on my own 2 feet, and being able to kind of be able to find growth in the unfamiliar.
So Ramneek, I'm going to stick with you for another question. When did you decide that you wanted to explore an international experience?
Yeah, I think this pivots nicely from my last point, is that it wasn't an intentional decision. An opportunity presented itself actually to my husband. And so we kind of looked at this opportunity pragmatically to see how this would affect both of our careers, because I had a stable career back in Toronto. And so there was no real compelling reason that would make me want to jump on this opportunity. But from a pragmatic place, it made sense. So again, I kind of jumped head first or feet first, or however the phrase goes, and went into the unfamiliar. And I've been able to land on my 2 feet. So once again, I've been able to figure it out as I went along. And so the opportunity presented itself for him, but then I kind of learned and got a grasp on what I wanted to do once I got here.
Now, Traj, what about you? When did you decide that now you started off in, living in Boston, coming to McMaster and then returning?
Right. That's right. I actually wanted to be closer to home because my parents were still there in the United States. So I wanted to look for opportunities. So it was part was being closer to home. And the other part was also just looking for a different opportunity. I wanted to switch careers, and an opportunity presented. I was lucky enough to have a mentor in the United States who gave me a shot to work in analytics here in the United States. And I kind of just took it from there. So I wanted to come back, but it wasn't like I was intentionally applying for positions or anything like that. It just happened, and I was lucky enough to come back.
So Maurice, you graduated from McMaster with an engineering degree. Did you immediately look to an opportunity in the States, or did it just sort of fall on your laps, or how did you get to where you are now?
Definitely opportunity. It fell in my lap because I didn't at the outset initially look to move to the United States, mainly because it was kind of the unknown, right? I really hadn't met or known anybody that made that move at all in my class or even close to it. And it was just the good fortune of making a lot of trips to the US in my role at the time, and working with folks here that kind of attracted me to it, because I could see the differences in terms of the types of roles, the speed at which some of the progression happened in your career. And that was some of the mental process of me really getting myself ready to think about it and then eventually do it.
So Ramneek, you're in Seattle. Maurice is in Boston, but you've also lived in San Francisco in the States for a bit. And Natraj, you're in Atlanta now, but you were just recently before that in New York City. So for all three of you, what are sort of the similarities and differences in these cities from your experience growing up in Canada? Has it been a culture shock? Has it been pretty easy to find, your rhythm and a life in a different city from where you grew up in, Toronto, for example? Maurice, what about you?
I've been here now longer than I ever lived in Canada, which is a very strange thing for me. So at this point, it's clear that I've definitely found my rhythm here in the United States, having lived on both the East and West Coasts. It is a culture shock. I will not deny that. I think it still is for folks coming through, even as much as Toronto in Canada has not matured, but grown into a cosmopolitan city, an international city. It's still very much a culture shock because it is like 50 individual countries out here. But yeah, the adjustment is real, and the adjustment period I think will vary for everyone in terms of making peace with the switch. Some folks embrace it entirely. Other folks like me still have a foot in that pond that says, I feel in my heart of hearts that I'm still a Canadian, right? I still embody the sensibilities and so forth. But yeah, it's an interesting transition to be made for sure.
And so for you, because you were in San Francisco and now you're back in Boston, was there a big difference between the two locations?
Absolutely, right. So I think as fast as things move here in Boston, it's up to 11 in on the West Coast, right? Whether it be San Francisco or LA or anywhere up and down that coast. Just because I think of its history in tech and a lot of the advancements over the last 50 years, right? So for me, I thought I would actually move out to the West Coast and never come back when I first moved. And 3 or 4 short years later, I came back to Boston because it just really didn't fit for my particular needs in terms of quality of life and balance and so forth. But nothing against it. I think it works for many, many folks. It just did not work for me. And I kind of can say that, Boston is really the place that I can see myself staying if I don't ever make it back to Canada.
Right.
Boston would be it.
Boston's lovely. We have a lot of Mac grads in the Boston area. So Natraj, you were, before we joined, we were chatting about your recent move from New York City, where the, very small apartment and expensive rent to Atlanta. So how was that move for you? Like first to New York and then now to Atlanta?
Yeah, New York was a huge, I wouldn't say culture shock. It was a shock to the system for sure. I thought living in Toronto, I lived in Toronto for 3.5 years. And I thought Toronto was a big city. New York City is something else of its own. It's a beast. But it was a shock to just see how fast paced it was. Just how dense of a population it is, right? And you have 8 million people that live in this one city, and it's not very big. So I think that was a huge shock for me, just to see how many people were on there. New York everyone is awake at all waking hours. It's not normal. So I think that was a big shock for me. Professionally, I think it was also a big shock because I switched careers. And I switched to finance, which New York is the city. New York City is the hub for finance. And I didn't realize how fast paced that was going to be. I kind of, echo Maurice's sentiment in terms of it's just each state has a different feel. And I think the biggest shock for me was moving from New York City to Atlanta, which is in the South, which is very different politically, the way people's lives are here. I also moved from the city into the burbs. And so that in itself was huge. But I think what I will say is that my experience at McMaster allowed me to meet different people from different cultures, from different walks of life. And so I think because of that, I was able to kind of just adjust from such a big city or medium city from Toronto to big city, New York, and then New York to Atlanta.
And Ramneek, you're in Seattle. So let's ask you a question like culture shock. I mean, not too far from Vancouver. So, maybe it's a little bit more similar there. And you also moved out there because your husband's had a job opportunity and you followed. So, so number one, was it culture shock for you? And two, did you have difficulty finding a job because, you went along, you joined your husband on that journey?
That's right. I think what Natraj and Maurice have mentioned is all true. I think another thing that I've noticed moving to the United States, especially in Seattle. I think it is the most similar to Toronto as you could possibly get in the United States. We have the diversity. It's still not as much of a metropolitan as, California would, downtown Seattle, or sorry, Los Angeles or San Francisco or New York would be. Seattle is still kind of a little baby city. So it's the most similar to Toronto in that sense. But what I have noticed is that a lot of in the States, people do move around between states. So you get a lot of varied political opinions because you'll have in any given state people that have come from anywhere in America. Whereas in Canada, you didn't really, in my opinion, I didn't see that as much. If you were in Ontario, you generally were in Ontario. So we all kind of grew up around the same kind of political ideals, the same kind of structure. And yeah, whereas here you can really find anyone on anywhere of the spectrum because everyone's moving from so many different states. In terms of a culture shock, not so much, because again, this is probably the closest to Toronto as you can find in the United States, and it is generally left-leaning, although I'll say it's not as left-leaning as Toronto, but it is still left-leaning than it is than any other state, in my opinion. And as far as finding a job goes, I did find my job within a couple months of moving here, and I did move here again initially because of my husband. But I think one of the strategies that really helped me in finding my role, which I want to share with everyone here, is getting your resume professionally done. This is something that I'm very, very passionate about. And especially if you're moving somewhere that is unfamiliar, it's important to free up your time to engage in all the other aspects of the job search, like networking, meeting people, understanding the community, understanding what opportunities are prevalent in that area, what organizations are really big. Seattle, everyone's kind of known for the tech industry here. Amazon, that's kind of the neighborhood that I live in. So getting the lay of the land is very important. So by freeing up that space and not focusing on the resume and the cover letter and kind of contracting that out, so to speak, it really allows you to focus your attention on the other aspects of the move and getting familiar with this new place. In saying that, I will give a couple additional tips because I've gotten my resume professionally done a couple times, and there's some lesson learned even in that. And so one thing I will say is make sure when you do get your resume professionally done, number one, make sure that you are given some sort of guarantee that within X amount of time, you will find a job, or you get your money back, or you get a reevaluation of your resume, that sort of thing. And secondly, ensure that you are given a telephone interview with the individual that is making your resume. I have had the opposite approach where you hand someone all your information and they take what they can and build something from it, and it just fails miserably. And you don't have that guarantee. And I've had the other approach where you get the guarantee and you get an amazing product. And so I think that was definitely instrumental in helping me with my job search and being able to find a job so quickly after moving here. I mean, quickly and is all relative, of course, but within 2 months, I think was pretty ideal. So those are my tips, and that's kind of the strategy that I used.
Those are great tips. So I'm going to invite people. I've got a bunch of questions still to go, but feel free to any time to put a question in the Q&A, and I'll do my best to get them, and we'll kind of pepper them in between as we go along. So Maurice, we actually have a question for you. So I'm going to go to you. Did you consider doing a master's to pursue a technical career in the US? Do you recommend that? I don't think you have a master's degree, if I remember correct.
I do. So it's not a master's in engineering. I have a master's in business administration. MBA.
There we go. Yeah.
And I didn't consider it at the time. So I think, for me, it's perhaps a temporal thing more than anything else, because, again, I'm old. I graduated a while ago from Mac. And so for me, it really wasn't that big of a deal when I really started looking at jobs in the US, because it wasn't the price of entry for most technical jobs here. It was just really more merit and experience, right? But as the years went on, I eventually did get the MBA, because then it started to become that price of entry for different kinds of roles. So the second part of the question, in terms of whether I'd recommend it, it all depends on whether you've already charted your career course in terms of, for example, going deep within your discipline. So for example, if you are in engineering and you want to become a specialist or a subject matter expert in that type of engineering, then by all means, you should consider doing a master's degree, because it will make sure that you can stand above the rest in terms of your expertise and capabilities. Right. On the business side, it may be the same as well. Getting into an MBA program, a really good MBA program, also helps catapult you into the right role when it matters. Now, part of the great equalizer, I think, of this last 20 months or so in terms of the pandemic is folks are starting to realize that a lot of that really isn't that important, where some of the big tech companies here have actually removed the requirement to have any degree at all. So you can become a developer, for example, at Google without a degree. So you really want to take a hard look at what your career trajectory is, what you'd like it to be, in terms of whether you decide you want to take on the additional time and expense of getting a master's degree.
Thank you. And Natraj, have you run into any challenges where you have, I'm going to take up on the resume. So you got your resume and you hand it in and they kind of look and say like, McMaster, who's McMaster? So we know McMaster, we're proud graduates. We know McMaster is a top 100 university in the world, but not everybody knows where Hamilton, Ontario is, let alone McMaster. So did you run into any of those issues when you were looking for a job in the States? And then also you've changed careers in the States a couple of times.
Yeah. Actually, to be very honest, a lot of the ways in which I was able to get a job here had nothing to do with my resume. I had a very different experience. I think one of the things you learn about living in New York City is all about networking. And that's very different from Toronto, life, right? I think I wrote down in my notes here about happy hours. That is huge in New York City. I can't tell you how many happy hours I went to just network with people. So I think it was more that and less resume and finding the right connection, which was really important. And I was shameless, basically. At a certain point, you just kind of have to put yourself out there, talk to people. I am a natural introvert. I had to get out of my comfort zone and just have conversations with people. You'd be surprised. I went from analytics to now I work in financial technology, and I work in a very different land than I used to work in. But a lot of it was just conversations with different people and being able to just being open. I think that was the biggest lesson I learned from kind of finding the job or the right job. And I think I've landed there now. It took me a while, but I've landed there now.
And now, Ramik, we've had a bunch of questions about, like the process. Did you, was it difficult for you to find out like what you needed to do if you wanted to actually move to the United States and take a job, from your husband? Your husband's in the military, if I remember correctly. So it might've been a little bit, they might've had a clearer path for him, but did you run into very many issues when you were making that decision?
Definitely. I think for us, of course, we had more resources because we are in more of a defined program when we are moving. And so that definitely made the move easier. I know there was a lot of questions around the visa requirements and a very good question around what box you tick in terms of whether or not you can work in the States. These are all really great questions. For me, I had similar concerns because I started applying for jobs 6 months before the move, because I'm just that type of person where I want to make sure that everything's organized. But one of the things that I learned is to take it a step at a time. So focus on finding a job and be truthful in that job search. So if you don't know how to get a visa, you can select that you are able to work in the States. And correct me if I'm wrong, Maurice and Natraj, about that, because that's what I did. I clicked that in the box, I clicked that I was able to work in the States. And from there, I kind of figured out the visa as I went along. But I think it definitely varies on what country you're moving from. I was moving from Canada, I'm a Canadian citizen, so I think that helped. So some employers do help you in finding the visa, sorting out the visa situation. But again, I think I was in a unique situation where the military definitely assisted and guided me through it and helped me in getting my visa as well. But definitely found finding the job harder than getting the visa is what my overall synopsis would be.
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit if I can.
Yes.
So yeah, I like one of the questions here is about, hey, someone's got a job that they're going to go take in Santa Clara, California, and they're going on a TN visa. That's my story. I did the same thing, right? It was really easy for me to get the TN visa, and my first job was at Chrysler Corporation in Detroit, so I could just drive back and forth through the border, show my passport with TN visa stamped into it or stapled into it, and away I went. The harder part was when you're working your way up that ladder. So the TN visa is fairly easy. There's an allocation, of course, in terms of how many of those they can give out as well. But then from there, for me, it was the H-1 visa, which was a lot harder to get, and did require some level of assistance from my employer, Chrysler, at that time. So that process took about 3 years at the time. And then from there, your choices are for sure going for full-on citizenship or going for a green card. I chose the green card route. So, over these years, I've been a green card holder. I've just recently started the citizenship process, mainly because I do want to get involved in the voting process. But other than that, the TN visa by far is the easiest way to go. H-1B has become a little bit of a pickle. It's been politicized a little bit over here in the US. So again, quotas have been shifted and changed as to how many folks can get that. And you really do have to depend upon an employer to help you typically with that, because the expense to hire a lawyer yourself is very, very high. So that's kind of the advice I would give in terms of like the path to walk as you're thinking about coming in.
Excellent. And Natraj, anything from you, like any tips that you would offer for folks? I mean, you had a little bit different experience because you were in the States.
No, yeah. I actually didn't. So mine is I've held every single visa probably ever. My dad recently just got his green card, and he had been in the States for about 13 or 14 years. So it's very different for different people based on their backgrounds. I'll say that up front, right? Me being of Indian origin, I had an Indian visa, and that has its own complications altogether. So I started with a TN visa and then moved over to an H-1 visa. I joke about this. I married someone who's American because of a green card wedding, but it wasn't really for a green card wedding. But that was kind of how I got it. I would say my piece of advice, be patient. It is not easy to go through that process. I know many friends who have come from Canada, who've come here, who are still waiting, and they've been here for 15 years. So it's kind of a trade-off you have to realize, and you kind of have to think through, to be very honest, because when you're on a visa in a different country, even though it's the United States, you're kind of in limbo zone, right? There are certain things you can or cannot do. So it's just dependent on how risk averse you are at the end of the day.
So for the three of you, if someone's like in fourth year and not really sure where they want to work, or they have an interest to think, oh, actually, maybe I would like to think to look for a job in the States. Is there any, industries you'd recommend? Is there any areas in the country that you'd recommend to start for someone to look for a job? Remy, why don't I start with you, and then Maurice, and then Natraj?
I think that doing an environmental scan independently is really important, understanding what it is that you are looking for in terms of the job. And the thing is, sometimes it's not so much job specific. Someone may have their sights set on a place. Someone may be interested in moving to California, which in that case, my advice would be a little bit different. I would say do an environmental scan in California to see what industries are really booming there, and then work backwards from there. If you have a vague idea in terms of where you want to go, and a vague idea in terms of what you want to do when you get there, I would say turn that vagueness into something more tangible and hop on your preferred job search platform. Mine is LinkedIn. And what I would do is I would hop on LinkedIn, find someone that is in the job that I want, and I would reach out to them on LinkedIn and build that connection. And then also look at similar job postings that have that, that job title that you're interested in, or that work in that field that you're interested in. And then go to those job postings, go to the job specific, the specs within that job posting. And that almost becomes a checklist for you, because right within there, it tells you what experience you need, what qualifications you need, and you can kind of carry that with you as a checklist that you want to check off as things that you want to make sure that you have or that you acquire. So that way you're better positioned for that job that you're looking for, or that place that you want to move to. So that's if you were moving to a place. I would definitely say doing that kind of research and having that understanding. And then creating that practical kind of roadmap for yourself is really important.
Maurice, any tips and places to start to look for a job in the States and industries that people might want to consider?
For sure. As Ramnik says, you really want to do that. I love the words environmental scan, like the idea of kind of going to the areas and checking out what life is like there and really spend some time. I mean, I love the fact that between VRBO and Airbnb, you can go live somewhere for a while and really understand what the people are like, what the culture is like. I would highly recommend that, a couple of weeks, spend some time, drive the commute, see what it's like, because I'll tell you what, a place like San Francisco, we considered living there. And part of the reason, again, we moved back is because it's awesome when I was taking the BART, when I realized I would have to drive my own car from one area to the other, that was like, no way I'm going to do that. It was ridiculous, right? So spend the time in each place to see what's out there. As far as industries are concerned, I'm in the space, I'm in tech. So I've worked in hardware as well as now software. And I would say that in almost every respect, the handling, managing, understanding of data ends up being a thing that there cannot be enough people hired in any place I've ever worked. And I'm coming in as a neophyte, right? I worked on cars for a long time. Now I'm working in financial services for a bank. And everyone has the same problem. We understand what customers are doing. We can't get any insights of it until we have someone to do the data analysis of it, right? And so that was one of the things that became very apparent to me very quickly over the last, I would say, 5 years, is that data scientists, data warehouse folks, data lake folks, that's a huge, huge, huge industry. Conversely, though, there's a question here in the Q&A about a manufacturing engineer coming from McMaster, right? Where should they start looking? Strangely enough, for example, a lot of the southern states are manufacturing meccas, right? So a lot of car companies and other industries have moved to the Carolinas and Georgia and Tennessee because they kind of avoid some of the UAW. That's kind of one of the reasons they do it, but also because you have a massive base of young folks that are willing to work, easy to train, and work hard. And they're always also looking for folks that understand industry, understand manufacturing, understand those hardware skills, if you will, right? So there's any opportunity you want here you can find, but you just really want to take the time to look in the areas of interest, go out there, spend some time, meet the people, and then make your call.
And Natraj?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak about the financial services industry because I've just been in it for such a long time. Honestly, before COVID, I would say if you're looking for a financial services job, you want to look at either Chicago, New York, San Francisco as your kind of hubs. But I think what has been interesting that I have found, at least during the pandemic, is things have changed in the tech industry, right? People are now very comfortable with remote working and things like that. So I think that people are now in an advantageous position, at least in the tech industry. If you find a place that you really want to live in, go there, and you'll probably more than likely find a job that's willing to let you be remote, which is what I'm doing right now. None of my teammates are here. Everyone is out in California or in Minneapolis or in Chicago. So I think it's an interesting time now to find a job. Again, like previously, if I said financial technology, you'd go to New York, but it's kind of open season now. So it's find the place you want to live in and then find the job that kind of would fit your needs.
So I want to thank everybody for all the great questions, and we're making our way through them. Ramik, I've got a question for you. So here's a situation someone has. The person has a job offer with Amazon's finance rotation program in Seattle. But they are hesitant about accepting the offer because they'd have to move away from their current job, which has a very supportive social environment. He or she works as a current junior auditor at KPMG. Do you have any insight on the office culture in Seattle on the finance tech side? Like, how have you found that? Like, you worked in Canada, now you're working in Seattle. What's the culture like there?
Yeah, funny enough, I'm actually in the Seattle neighborhood, or of course I'm in the Seattle neighborhood, but the Amazon neighborhood. So right outside my window over there is the Amazon Spheres, and I'm sure Jeff Bezos is somewhere back there. But in any case, I would say that it's definitely, in terms of, we talked about a culture shock, there is definitely a different work environment in the US than there is in Canada. Speaking specifically to the financial sector, that's outside of my zone. I actually work in the public sector. I work in government and energy policy, to be specific. And doing policy work in Canada versus doing policy work in the US is two very different beasts. And so you have to be prepared to do that. You have to know that it's not going to be the same. And you have to be prepared for that. And so it kind of goes back to our earlier point of, if you have a job opportunity and you're kind of tethering between whether or not you want to pursue it, again, I would encourage you to definitely take a flight down to Seattle. As far as comparing Seattle to Toronto, it is comparable. There's diversity. The culture is probably the most similar to Toronto than anywhere in the States, in my opinion. However, it's really incumbent upon you to take that initial step and really embed yourself in the environment, even for a week or two, because that is going to make a difference. And to very quickly give you an example, when my husband and I first moved here, we were living near Pike Place, a different area of downtown, which someone from Toronto, you would think that it's kind of a very iconic area. The very first Starbucks is there, and everyone kind of knows Seattle as that area, the Pike Place area. But the location that I lived in Pike Place, I very quickly learned was probably one of the most dangerous places to live downtown Seattle. And on one occasion when I was walking home from work, just 20 minutes after I just entered my door, there was a shooting in the area. So that was something I learned while living here, and I wouldn't have known from my home back home in Toronto. It took me coming here, getting used to the area, knowing the area, learning about the area. So you really have to even just give yourself a week to come. And if you're making that big of a move, especially, I think it's important to come and do a trial and error of sorts.
And I think that's great advice that all of you have given, is like, go to the area and see if you like it and if you do that. So we've got a very practical question. Do you guys still pay taxes in Canada, or do you, because you're Canadian citizens, do you do both? Like, taxes is always on everybody's mind. Does anybody pay Canadian taxes anymore?
I don't pay my Canadian taxes. And it's actually, I was very surprised about how easy it is to just let the CRA know that you are no longer a resident of Canada. I just had to write a handwritten note, actually, which was very interesting, and fax it in. But I don't. I think the only time, and correct me if I'm wrong, I am not fully into the tax laws, but I think the only time is if you have any investment accounts that's there, or you own property in Canada, where you'll actually have to pay. The United States and Canada, to my knowledge, have double taxation laws. So I did earn salary in the United States and Canada at one point during my transition. And so basically what would happen is you pay Canadian taxes and you would deduct that in the United States.
Maurice, I guess you're paying Canadian taxes, are you? No.
I am. Again, because I'm in more of a unique situation. My husband and I did keep our property back home in Toronto. And so for that reason, and I did notice in advance some of the questions that we got, a lot of them were around the tax scenario. And I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a financial specialist. So I can't advise. And I think my advice would be to consult a professional in that field, consult a tax specialist, consult someone who knows their taxes. But because we own property, I do have to file Canadian taxes, but you do get a credit again for what you've already paid in the United States in my situation. Additionally, it depends state by state, because there's state income tax and there's federal income tax in the United States, and each state has their own income tax percentage. My state, Washington, does not have income tax, but I do pay federal income tax. So it really varies from state to state. And that's something, again, that's very unique about the United States. And if we're talking about culture shock, that would be a culture shock to know, in some states you don't have to pay income tax, in other states you do. But again, if you're making that kind of a move, be sure to consult a professional.
Yeah, that would be our advice on also figuring out exactly what visa you should apply for and all that stuff. But these are, your experiences, your lived experiences. But again, anything finance and how to accept a job and all that, you should always consult with the experts for that. So living costs, is it in the States? Do you think, from when you were in Canada to the United States, is there a huge difference? I mean, I know, Maurice, you lived in a very expensive part of the country for a bit. Natraj, you did as well. Seattle, I think, is, okay, but not maybe comparable to Vancouver, but certain, oftentimes people say Vancouver is a very expensive city to live. So any thoughts on that around cost of living?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, from what my friends from Mac tell me, it's ridiculously expensive to live in Toronto. So I'm guessing that it's getting to be pretty much parity level in terms of the big cities where there's a lot of concentration of really smart people coming to work for big companies and so forth. So I would say, like, folks would say, hey, San Francisco is one of the most expensive places to live in the world, for sure, as is Hong Kong, as is New York, as is almost anywhere that is a major metropolitan, London especially, right? But I don't know if you can escape it here in the US in terms of the expense unless you live in rural areas, right? So I think that, one of the, like anywhere, one of the best kept secrets here is, I live in the Boston area, which is, you can see 5 states up and down the highway within about an hour and a half. And if you go all the way to Vermont, a friend of mine just, sold his condo here in downtown Boston, and basically the proceeds from that sale bought him a home with 22 acres of land in Vermont, right? So that just goes to show you the disparity between like the small condo we had here versus the estate that he now has over in Vermont. However, it's Vermont. There's 2,000 people in this town, and he can get broadband sometimes. So it's those kinds of choices you're going to have to make in terms of where you want to live. But cost of living will vary definitely by proximity to big cities, local transit, all of those things. That same as Toronto. I mean, all I'm trying to say here is that it's very, very, very similar.
Well, yes, and actually there was they do a study now, and I think Hamilton, I think it was released last week. Hamilton is the most expensive city to live in North America now. So I mean, here we go. Natraj, what about you? You mean you've had a little bit of, very expensive to maybe a little bit more reasonable in the Atlanta area?
Yes. I would say New York was incredibly expensive. And it was one of the things that shocked me the most was people were very comfortable paying 50% of their income on a monthly basis to their rent, which was insane in my head. And I never lived without a roommate. So there's that. But I think it really depends on your context as well. Right. So, I think one of the questions that came up is why did I move from Atlanta to New York? Was primarily, or rather from New York to Atlanta, was primarily because of cost of living. The time I was living in New York, it was just me by myself. So it was okay to be spending crazy amount of money on rent because I had no other expenses other than that and food. But moving to suburban area like Atlanta was primarily because of cost of living. I couldn't afford to buy in New York or the big cities, so decided to move to a suburb in Atlanta because I have 2 kids and I have a family now. So I think it really also depends on context. But again, I think what Marie said, you're paid. It's just depending on where you are, and you're paid appropriately to the cost that you're there. So everything is just going to be really expensive if you're in a big city, to be honest.
So, Ramneek, I'm going to ask you a little bit of a different question because I think I can guess from the conversation so far, Natraj and Maurice, I think, are going to be probably living in the United States for a while longer, and maybe for the rest of their careers and post-retirement. So for you, do you see yourself staying in the States for an indefinite amount of time, or do you plan to return to Canada? I mean, you've kept property here, so that could be an indication of your plans.
Yeah. I think ultimately I like to play it by ear, and similar to how I found myself here in the States, see what kind of opportunity comes my way. And I try to be pragmatic about my decision on whether or not I want to pursue that opportunity. And it's a collective decision, obviously, between myself and my husband, but there is that draw. My entire family is still in Ontario, my friends. And then with COVID, it just kind of makes it even more challenging to be isolated once more, and not even just isolated, but from the East Coast to the West Coast. So there's definitely pros to moving back home, and it's not something I'm actively pursuing at the moment, but if a good enough opportunity was to arise, I wouldn't be opposed to it. So again, I play it by ear, and that if I was to give advice to anyone, I would say, don't get married to any sort of idea of, it's great to think about your tax scenario. It's great to think about every single detail, but sometimes you can get lost in the minutia. And one of the things that I've learned, especially if you're making a kind of big move like this, is being adaptable and malleable to your circumstances. And that's what I've had to be. And that's kind of my lesson learned from a lot of this.
So let's talk just a little bit about the pandemic and some questions around, do you see in your own industries that people are open to, I mean, most of us, I mean, I'm still working from home and will be at least till January, remote working is part of our lives that never was before. When we do return, it's hybrid. So, Maurice, for you and your position right now, how have you managed through the pandemic, and how easy is it to find a remote job in the States? Or do you think this will continue to be how people are going to work?
What Natraz says earlier about being able to move from New York to Atlanta, I think that's kind of the new norm, right? It's happened for a lot of my associates and as former colleagues as well, where they have moved from the Boston area to North Carolina, or they moved from New York to Florida, or they used to move to the middle of Texas somewhere, right? Because it seems that many of the roles that don't require you to be in an office for a specific purpose, for example, if you're a doctor, you can do some telemedicine, but you really do have to have an office, a home base, and all that for your practice. Some of the more hands-on professional activities that you're going to do if you're working in a development shop for, I used to work I wrote about the robotics company. So, there came a time where the folks in the lab had to come back because you really couldn't do that work at home. But for most of the types of work, knowledge work that requires basically sending emails for a living, you can do that anywhere. Right. And that's the real benefit of what the pandemic has delivered for us, is that you can make that choice for quality of life where you skew the balance way over to I want to be able to kind of just walk away from my desk and walk my 9-year-old to school, which I do every day. Mm-hmm. Right. However, employers have gotten really hip to that. So now they're kind of modifying your pay based on where you live. So friends of mine that have moved to Amazon, for example, realize that if they are working for Amazon out of Sunnyvale, but they live in Oregon, they get paid for Oregon. And so that's one of the things you have to balance, that quality of life versus the fact that you will make significantly less depending on where you live. Right. So, but to your question, it seems like it's not now is the golden age of being able to kind of really suss out that difference.
Yeah. And Natraj, from your perspective in your industry?
Yeah, I'd say at least in the tech industry, people are now very accustomed to working from home. I can say for where I work, I don't foresee a timeline, to be honest. I think they've kind of talked about hybrid and, come whenever you want to, or maybe some big meetings, then you can come in. But I think it's hard to untangle the flexibility of working from home as well. It has pros and cons, obviously. I think working from home, one of the downfalls of it is you have a natural tendency to be on all the time. There's no separation from work. But I think the pros of that is there's flexibility, right? I can drop my kid off to school. I can, work out randomly during the day. So I think that type of flexibility is tough to kind of go back to the norm where you go back to your office 9 to 5. I think you're starting to see a lot of employees start to look back and say, you know what, I'm willing to take that pay cut because I have a flexible life and I'm okay with that. And it's so, I don't think we're going to go back to a full 9 to 5 job or in the office 9 to 5, to be honest, just because I think people just like the flexibility of working from home.
Yeah. And Remy, you're in the public sector. So what's happening in the public sector?
Yeah, I was thinking as the other two were speaking that, I think the tech industry is nothing if not innovative. And I don't know if innovation is one of the tenets of the government. I don't know if that, when you think government, if that's the brand is innovation. So, but I will say that we have also opened the doors for hybrid work environments in my workplace. I work with the city, and I don't see that ending anytime soon. And I will also say that, in my opinion, I think that moving forward, companies that are not going to get on board with remote work will eventually potentially have to get on board, because one thing that COVID has done, I think, across the board is rejig our priorities as individuals and as families. And at the time, the culture was this grinding culture and everyone's seeking promotions and jobs and living to go to work, and being at home and the world kind of slowed down for a minute, I think helped reprioritize things for everyone. And so now everyone is seeking remote work. So I think even those companies, and we hear a lot of that in my workplace, but I hear some of that, the rumblings in other public sector and organizations that I work closely with, is if you're not getting on board now, eventually it will kind of, the environment is such, and the folks that are working and employees, that's what they're looking for. And if you're not offering that, people are willing to leave.
Yeah, that's very true. So
Mhm.
one of the questions, a couple questions we've had sort of that have come in have talked about, like, maybe moving down to the States with families. And so what would concern most people, would be no surprise, is like, access to healthcare and good education. So Maurice, you've got two older children. Natraj, you have two younger children. So maybe, were you guys worried about the education system or any of that when you were making those decisions to take a job in the States?
It wasn't when I was taking a job to the States, but I will tell you now, having kids, education is like is one of the biggest decisions on why we moved to an Atlanta, in a suburb. Living in New York City, where you have to deal with the public system, it's not the easiest thing in the world. I think that's been really eye-opening to me, and the fact that, I mean, let's not beat around the bush, that the education system in the United States is a little flawed because it's based on your zip code, right? So if you live in a very affluent area, you're going to have the better schools. And so I think that's been a really eye-opening experience and worrisome for me. If I was to do this again with a family from Canada, being in the public school system in Canada was, I always talk about it, right? I was like, it was great. This elementary school was right there. I never had to worry about anything. The school system was fantastic. But and I lived in Toronto at that time. And my parents were immigrants, and they had never had an issue with us in school. But I think if you're moving from Canada to the United States with family, you have to really think hard where you're going to move to, and be very prescriptive about that. The second part, which I think your question was healthcare. Healthcare is the most complicated system here in the United States. It is very complicated. It was very complicated to me too. At least I was like, it was easy for me. I had a health card. I could go in whenever I wanted to. There's no issues. So I think if you were to move with family, just be careful. I wouldn't say don't do it. It's more about, it's about, again, how much are you willing to give up? If someone asked me if I had a family in Canada, would I move to the United States? I probably wouldn't, to be very honest, just because I think it was easier with kids there.
Yeah. And Maurice, anything from your side?
Absolutely. I've done it. I've seen it both ways, right? So my first move to the United States was me fancy free, right? So it was really, really easy. I didn't think about any of that stuff. I met my wife in Michigan when I was there, and then moving back and forth with her, I realized how much more I would have had to have considered, because even moving within the United States, it was her full-time job to figure out everything that Natraj said, right? The idea of like, where are the schools good? Where are the zip codes good? Where is it safe? How do we figure out the healthcare situation for these kids? Like, how do we find the right doctors? And I had healthcare through my company, and it was still a Byzantine process to figure all of this out on your own. So I would probably echo that same sentiment that as you consider it, think really, really hard about where you're going to land, kids or otherwise, single or otherwise, because you will find some madness here in terms of, hey, if I move to Massachusetts, it's more likely that I'll be able to find healthcare on the exchange, because I have to go to the exchange unless I have it through my health provider to figure out what I need and sign up for that, or else I get penalized. I got to pay a fine. You'll go to other states where that exchange is not even available to you, right? You have to go to the emergency room all the time. And it's just that kind of weirdness when you come from a country, to your point, Natraj, where I walked in with my OHIP card. OHIP, do you remember that?
Oh,
and
yeah.
I would say, hey, this, I'd hand it over and they'd be like, oh yeah, sit over there. Doctor's going to see you in like 20 minutes, yeah. Right? That is alien to this place, completely alien. So that's a strong consideration in terms of your making that move for sure.
We've had such great questions, and we're never going to be able to get all of them, but I think we've hit all the big stuff: taxes, health, education, culture, and tips on moving. So I'm going to end with sort of a question that you may have an answer, or maybe you're still looking. But Remy, how long did it take you to land your dream job?
I would still say I'm pretty early in my career. I'm in my early 30s. And so I think my dream job is still out there. Not to say that I don't enjoy my current job, because I definitely do enjoy what I do. So I would say there is no roadmap that tells you how long it takes to get that job or what it looks like. And if you, or even if you know, once you have it, that's the dream job, you know? So I couldn't really answer that with a clear, definitive answer, I would say.
Maurice?
I'm going to put a plug in for McMaster. I think one of the things that I learned at McMaster was definitely that coming out with the education I got, I could do almost anything. Like I came out with chemical engineering and I work in finance, for crying out loud, like software, enterprise software for finance, right? And I bounced between probably 5 or 6 industries in my time here. And the beauty of it is no one blinked an eye, right? So that search for that perfect job, I'm able to kind of be a wandering fool and keep finding new things to learn. So I think that's kind of the perfect thing for me personally, is just being able to learn and acquire new skills, be able to move with what I got from a basic foundation of going to Mac and apply that almost in any circumstance that I've been into. So I would say the journey is still going, Karen. It's still going. I'm still on the hunt, right? I don't plan to ever stop.
All right.
So it's awesome. Yeah.
And Natraj, do you have your dream job yet? Or are you still looking?
I feel like this is a tricky question because I worked for you, Karen.
You had your dream job, Natraj.
It was a very tricky question. I don't know how to answer this. No, I've been in many different industries, right? So I did nonprofit for 7 years. I did insurance. I've done financial technology. I did ad tech for a while. I would say I started working in 2006. That was my first job at McMaster University. It's now, I think I started my job in 2020. I think I kind of found it. Is it the job that I would want to do for the rest of my life? Probably not, but I think it's one of those jobs that I've kind of got to a place where I'm happy to wake up every day and really just give it my all, as much as I can. So it took a while, but I think I kind of echo Maurice's sentiment. Like you kind of have to, the great thing about now is I had a degree in life sciences and I'm in financial technology, like very, very different, right? So it's just, you kind of have to find what you're passionate about and go for it.
Well, then, I'll ask one more question a little bit, because I think, we're gathered together, we get to see each other on the screen, but we have a whole network of people who've been watching and listening and providing questions to us, which is a great network. So we have an amazing alumni network around the world. And I actually met Maurice at an alumni event. He came out to an alumni event in Boston. So maybe we'll sort of end on some advice on, each of you have made the leap to leave from Canada to go to the United States. And really networking is very important. So maybe a tip or two of what you did, of how you approached, of how you reached out and met people. I do know Natraj. When I went to see Natraj, excuse me, when I was visiting New York, he told me about how he went to happy hour and he networked through happy hour. So I'm sure he has some other things. But were you intentional? What sort of organizations? Did you join anything formal, like any of the Canadian clubs? So Remy, why don't we start with you? We'll go to Maurice and Natraj, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I think that professionally, networking is, you have options for conferences. There's also an app, one app that I use in particular. It's called Bumble, but it's for friends. And so that was huge because I met some other local Canadians and people that we had in common. And actually someone that had just moved to Seattle from Toronto, probably a month prior to me. So finding those online apps and Facebook groups has been huge for me. Finding some hobbies, Washington hiking is huge. So there is a Facebook Washington Hikers app where people are very open to meeting and going for hikes. So finding those online resources, I think, is important. And then this might sound silly, but get a dog. Dogs are a really great way to break the ice and make connections, whether you're at the dog park that you frequent often or, even just around your neighborhood. So dogs are a great resource for meeting people.
Excellent. Maurice, any tips around networking?
I love that. That's hilarious. Dogs truly are the way to go. But yeah, I think, building that network from the ground up is what you have to do, of course, but it's really easy these days, right? I wrote into one of the answers here that between LinkedIn, Twitter, meetups, TEDx conferences, symposia. So if you hear or see of a subject matter symposia, going to that, other webinars, live webinars where folks can have Q&A like this, those have been the best in terms of just meeting people outside of your space, right? So again, the reason I've been able to jump from industry to industry is because, if something catches my interest, if I want to get into, machine learning, I'll go to a machine learning conference, right? And invariably, you will find somebody who will talk your ear off about what it takes to get into it. And you make a connection and you maintain that connection. And it's just a matter of, you never know it. I'm an introvert, but in talking to people, you can find that common interest and then, take it at your pace. That's the kind of thing that really helps setting the pace for yourself to get into those fields or into the country for that matter.
Great. And Natraj, last word to you.
Yeah, I think one of the best, so I joined all the groups. I did all the sports groups when I moved to New York and networked that way. But I think one of the best things that actually has helped me land, I think 2 or 3 of my jobs so far, has been when you go to LinkedIn, you find a connection, let's say you find a job that you really want on LinkedIn, look at all the connections that are in there that are second or third degree from you. Find who those people are, find who those connections are, talk to that person, say, hey, listen, I have this job, X person, can you make an introduction? 9 out of 10 times people are so open to making those connections, and you're probably at the very least land an interview. It was so easy for me to just go, hey, I like US Bank, that's where I work now. I know a second degree person that works there. Okay, who's that person's connection that I know? Ask that person to make an introduction. It was I won't say it was easy, but at least it was much easier than just sitting a blind-in application through one of the websites with your resume, and because it just won't happen.
Excellent. Well, thanks to each of you for spending a little bit of your time. I know everybody is so super busy these days, and sitting in front of a screen, in the evening or late afternoon for our colleague who is in Seattle is, asking you to do a little extra. So we really, really appreciate. We had tons of great questions and lots of people participating. And Maurice, thank you for filling in and answering some questions as I was trying to scroll through them. There was lots coming in, but such great advice from each of you. So Natraj, Maurice, and Remy, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your tips and tricks and great advice. And thanks to everybody else, for our students. You're heading into the busiest time of the semester and final exams. We wish you well. For young alumni who are thinking about considering about this, we have lots of programming and lots of help for you to kind of help and connect with these folks. If you need a little extra question, I'm sure they'd be open to answer any questions that you might have after, like I should have asked that question or we didn't get to it. So on behalf of everybody here at McMaster, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your evening.